When you live in a quiet suburb, the idea of being home alone doesn't seem that terrifying. At least, that's what 19-year-old Claire thought. Her parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving her in charge of the house. She was used to solitude, and the stillness of the suburban night didn't bother her. But this particular night would leave her shaken forever. The evening began as any other. She spent the first few hours binge-watching a show, texting her friends and munching on snacks. Around 11 p.m., just as Claire was settling into bed, she heard a distinct thud coming from the attic. It startled her, but she brushed it off. It's probably just a raccoon or a loose box, she reasoned. Besides, the attic always made strange noises, but then it happened again. Louder this time. Thud, thud, thud. Claire froze, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The sound wasn't random anymore. It was rhythmic, almost like footsteps. A creeping sense of dread began to claw at her. She grabbed her phone and called her best friend, telling her about the noise. "Maybe it's an animal?" her friend suggested. "Yeah, maybe," Claire muttered, but deep down she didn't believe it. The footsteps were too deliberate, too human. She hung up and decided to go check, but only after grabbing a baseball bat from her brother's room. With every step up the creaky attic stairs, her heart raced faster. The air in the attic was musty and thick, making it hard to breathe. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of her flashlight. She scanned the space. Everything seemed normal. Boxes were stacked haphazardly and old furniture lay untouched. She was about to leave when something caught her eye. A small glint of light from behind a pile of boxes. Nervous, she approached it cautiously. As she moved the boxes aside, her heart stopped. A small hole had been carved into the wall, and behind it she could see the gleam of a camera lens pointed directly at her bedroom. But that wasn't the worst part. The wall behind the camera was hollowed out, revealing a crawl space just big enough for a person. Claire's heart pounded in her ears as she realized the truth. Someone had been living inside the walls of her house. She bolted downstairs, dialing 911 with trembling hands. When the police arrived, they found more than just the camera. They discovered old food wrappers, clothing, and a sleeping bag stashed away in the crawl space. Whoever had been living there had been watching her every move. The intruder was never found. To this day, Claire can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching her, lurking in the shadows of her own home. James was 16 when his parents left him alone for the first time. It wasn't a big deal. He had the house to himself for a few days, and he was looking forward to playing video games without anyone nagging him. But on the first night, things got strange. It started with a phone call around midnight. The number was unknown, but James answered it out of curiosity. "Hello," he said. No response. He could hear faint breathing on the other end. "Hello? Who is this?" he asked, his voice a bit shaky. Still no response, just breathing. Then the call ended abruptly. James shrugged it off, thinking it was probably some prank call. He returned to his game, but the eerie feeling lingered. A few hours later, just as he was getting ready for bed, his phone rang again. It was the same unknown number. James hesitated, but eventually picked it up. This time, a voice came through, soft and raspy. "I can see you." James's blood ran cold. His eyes darted around the room, but everything seemed normal. "Who is this?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The line went dead. Freaked out, James checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. He told himself it was just someone messing with him, but the unease gnawed at him. He decided to sleep with the lights on. The next night, the phone calls started again, this time even more frequent. Each call was the same voice, the same chilling message. "I can see you." By the third night, James was losing it. His parents were due back the following day, but he wasn't sure he could make it until then. He called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. The calls were coming from an untraceable number. That night, James was determined to stay up and catch the person in the act. He sat on the couch, eyes glued to the front door, clutching a kitchen knife. He barely blinked as he waited for the next call, but it never came. Instead, around 3 a.m., he heard a soft tapping at the window behind him. James whipped around, but the curtains were drawn. His heart pounded as the tapping grew louder and more insistent. Finally, he gathered the courage to pull the curtain back, and what he saw made him scream. A man was standing on the other side of the window, his face pressed against the glass, grinning. His eyes were wild, and his breath fogged up the window as he stared at James with a hungry intensity. James stumbled backward, dropping the knife. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The man banged on the window harder and harder. But then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished into the night. When the police arrived, they found nothing but smeared handprints on the window. James's parents came home the next day, and the call stopped, but he still wonders what would have happened if he hadn't pulled that curtain back. The shadow in the hallway. Tara was a single mother who worked long shifts at a local diner, leaving her 12-year-old son, Ethan, home alone after school. Ethan was a responsible kid, but he had always been afraid of the dark. The old house they lived in creaked and groaned, and the hallways always seemed too long, too dark. One night, while waiting for his mum to come home, Ethan heard footsteps echoing through the house. He paused his video game and listened intently. His heart pounded as the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps moved down the hallway toward his bedroom. "Mom!" he called out, but there was no answer. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Ethan held his breath, waiting for the handle to turn, but it didn't. Instead, a faint whisper reached his ears, almost unintelligible but unmistakably there. "Come out!" Terrified, Ethan grabbed a baseball bat and flung open the door, but the hallway was empty. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Shaken, he called his mum, telling her what had happened. She tried to reassure him, saying it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But Ethan knew what he had heard. The next night, the same thing happened. The footsteps, the whisper, and then nothing. Each night it seemed to get closer and closer, until one night when Ethan opened the door, a dark figure stood at the end of the hallway, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching him. Ethan screamed and slammed the door shut, locking it. He huddled under his bed, waiting for his mum to come home. When she finally did, the figure was gone. They moved out of the house a month later, but to this day, Ethan still dreams of the shadowy figure in the hallway, always standing just out of reach, watching.